Thanks for staying with us. The recently held gender-based violence shelter Indaba has revealed the important role played by shelters in fighting gender-based violence. Now, the National Shelter Movement of South Africa says funding shortfalls and a lack of support continue to hamper efforts to fight the scourge. Now, this funding crisis has led to some organizations shutting their doors, leaving some of the women stranded or with very little support. Let's discuss this further now. Fatima Mamod is a board member at the National Shelter Movement of South Africa and joins us live now. Good evening to you, Fatima, and thank you so much for your time. Firstly, before we even get into the nitty-gritties of this conversation, there is that medium-term budget policy statement tomorrow. What are some of your expectations?
We're expecting for funding to be specifically allocated, especially for NPOs that shelter women who face gender-based violence. We were very disappointed with funding being returned to National Treasury, about 564 million rand from the last budget that wasn't spent. And the Indaba has highlighted the chronic lack of funding that NPOs in the space are facing. So we really hope that there will be allocations specifically to NPOs to address this.
And this funding issue, as you talk about it, has proven to be a challenge over time now. And there is, of course, that huge concern of a lack of support, particularly for the survivors. Let's speak about the impact that it has had on the fight against GBV over time.
So the lack of funding and shelters not being guaranteed to receive funding on a regular basis means that we're unable to accommodate more women. There have been some of our own shelters in Johannesburg due to the lack of funding not being able to take on victims that come. So it's already brave enough of them, and we know the scourge that's affecting society when women actually decide to leave with their children. What this means is there isn't safe places, and then we're busy trying to find alternate shelters or accommodation, because where else do we send a woman like this with her kids who come through? It also means that we're unable to increase the need for shelters for other minority groups, LGBTI community members. There's gender-based violence that occurs in those communities, and to incorporate, and also shelters where it's homely. You've got women coming with young children. You need to be able to create a homely environment, and with the lack of funding, this affects that as well.
And I suppose it also puts them at risk because others are simply trying to escape abusive situations within the confines of their own homes.
Absolutely. So there's the risk for them. There's the risk then we turn them away. Do they go back? Does that mean another woman who could have been sheltered is now going to join another statistical number? And that also causes a lot of mental stress for shelter workers and shelter NPO employees and counsellors, because you know what she's experiencing, you know what's going on, and you know the high risk. How do you turn someone like this away due to a lack of funding?
And we often hear, Fatima, about the issue of non-compliance, for example, as the reason behind this funding crisis that some of the shelters are undergoing. But I was reading your statement earlier. As an organization, you say that there appears to be miscommunication here.
Absolutely. And I think this was debated and highlighted at our Indaba as well, with the National Social Department being there. And we managed to communicate, and there was consensus on this. It wasn't just one shelter that was experiencing this. And if I'm non-compliant as an NPO, we expect to be able to understand what is it that we're non-compliant about. And there are many times when this isn't even stated. So how can NPOs then ensure compliance? And that was the other aspect that was highlighted. So clear communication, compliance requirements, and then support for the NPOs, because we're working collaboratively to help government. So if there is, for example, zoning was one that came out, and a lot of NPOs are struggling with, but we don't understand what the requirements are, and also for support from the department to be able to comply then.
And does this speak to the concerns around a fragmented approach when it comes to fighting gender-based violence? Because if the different stakeholders simply aren't having the conversations that they're supposed to be having, then it makes the fight difficult, because I suppose people are fighting in silos instead of together.
Absolutely. I think this was another item that was highlighted. We had someone, a representative from the Public Protector's Office, also highlighting different departments and shortcomings, and we could clearly see the disconnect highlighted in the report that was presented to us. And this again showed consensus with the fact that what NPOs are highlighting is actually also out in the domain, and government is well aware of this.
And of course, as you talk about that, because this lack of resources, and funding will also impact, for example, a shelter when it comes to providing the necessary support, maybe through counseling, through having an in-house therapist, to have ongoing sessions with some of the survivors as well.
Absolutely. So people assume that shelters are only to house women and feed them and clothe them and their children, but that's not the only support services that shelters offer. There's a lot of psychological support that is needed. There's a lot of trauma. So we need trained medical specialists, social workers, and then once you've gone through that, to also be able to offer basic skills and training, so the ladies can then become active parts of our society and earn money and be, rehomed in an appropriate space once they're starting to earn money again.
And especially because, economic situations also have been seen as some of the contributors here. But thank you so much for your time, Fatima. And certainly you've highlighted some critical issues there that need to be tackled as far as the funding and the shortfalls are concerned. That was Fatima Mamod there, who's the National Shelter Movement of South Africa's board member.